It began as a tremor in a place where tremors should not exist, deep within the Imperium, where time folded into itself and thoughts birthed storms. Something shifted. Psychers across 1,000 worlds screamed without knowing why. Astropaths clawed at their eyes as visions of an unfathomable radiance tore through their minds. Even the demons paused, sensing a disturbance not born of fear or madness, but of something far more alien: curiosity. Within the warp's roiling currents, a line of pure white light formed. It was not a tear, nor a wound, nor a breach in the traditional sense. It was a question whispered directly into the fabric of reality, a single point where the impossible pressed its hand against the membrane of existence. And reality, ancient and reluctant, began to give way. The light grew, pulsing like the heartbeat of a newborn star. A vortex spiraled outward, bending the tides of the warp with an authority even the chaos gods felt. Khorne's rage stilled into suspicion. Tzeentch's endless schemes wavered. Nurgle's chuckles faltered. And even the Prince of Excess lifted its attention from 1,000 obsessions to gaze into the forming breach. They did not understand it. They did not command it. That alone was intolerable. In the mortal universe, the first signs were subtle. Distant astronomical readings shifting, the Astronomicon flickering by a fraction, Geller fields momentarily humming out of tune. Tech priests whispered Binharic prayers over machines that trembled as if they sensed a predator entering their domain. And somewhere within the labyrinth of Terra's Ordo Malleus, Inquisitors felt the cold weight of instinct settle in their bones. Something was coming. Something that did not belong. The point of white light became a sphere, and the sphere became a doorway, its edges singing with a tone that no mortal ear could survive. Warp storms fled from it. The raw currents of the Imperium bent like supplicants kneeling before an emperor unknown. And through that impossible gateway stepped an idea given form, a being not bound by physics, faith, or the whims of lesser gods. He emerged without haste, without fear, and without intention beyond simple observation. He did not fall into the universe so much as he entered it, like a guest stepping into a cathedral whose walls groaned at the intrusion of someone too great for their foundations to support. Stars flickered, gravitational lines twisted, space itself recoiled, recognizing that this presence defied every law it had ever obeyed. The Beyonder looked upon this new cosmos, not with eyes, but with understanding. He tasted ancient wars etched into starlight and felt the weight of 1,000,000 dying suns. He sensed the Imperium's psychic footprints, carved deep and desperate into the fabric of reality. He brushed against the minds of mortals who clung to faith because hope was a luxury they had long since forgotten. And he felt, for the first time in an eternity, confusion. This universe was wounded, scarred beyond comprehension. It breathed in suffering and exhaled despair. Entire civilizations survived only by ritualizing their agony. Even the warp, so chaotic and unbound, seemed to weep beneath the burden of its own corruption. The Beyonder hovered at the edge of this realization, fascinated by a cosmos where life continued despite the crushing inevitability of death. His presence spread outward like ripples across a dark ocean. On distant battlefields, Space Marines paused mid-strike as a tremor passed through their enhanced senses. In the depths of the Eye of Terror, demon princes shrieked as the tides of the warp shifted against their will. And on Holy Terror, the Emperor's endless psychic light flickered, just once, but enough to send terror through the souls of every astropath connected to him. The Beyonder drifted through the void, trying to comprehend the anomaly before him. He had traversed realities, shaped universes, and observed the rise and fall of cosmic empires, yet he had never encountered a creation so defined by its suffering. Pain here was not a consequence, it was a law. Hope was not a virtue, it was a rebellion. He raised a hand, not intending to act, but merely to test the texture of this strange universe. The fabric of space rippled, threads unraveling and reweaving themselves in patterns even the warp could not anticipate. For a heartbeat, the galaxy shifted. Planets flickered between states of life and ruin. Armies glimpsed visions of futures where they triumphed or perished utterly. The change lasted less than an instant, but it was enough. Across the galaxy, alarms screamed. Machines capable of measuring the impossible spasmed in hysteria. Inquisitors felt psychic shockwaves crawl beneath their skin. And in the chambers of Titan, the grey knights felt a presence so overwhelming and so pure in intention that it defied categorization. Not demon, not Xenos, not machine, something beyond. The Beyonder withdrew his hand, startled by the universe's violent reaction to the faintest brush of his power. This cosmos resisted him, as though it had learned long ago to fear the touch of anything unfamiliar. He found this defensive instinct intriguing. Far below, on the surface of an imperial shrine world orbiting a dying sun, a priest gazing at the night sky fell to his knees as a new star flared into existence. It was not a star, but the reflection of the Beyonder's presence, a beacon piercing the void. The priest whispered a prayer he did not understand, convinced he had witnessed a sign sent by the god emperor himself. Yet even as awe spread through some, dread crept into others. For nothing entered the galaxy unnoticed. Nothing arrived without consequence. And what had stepped into this reality was no god, no daemon, no legend forged in ancient bloodshed. It was something else entirely, something that defied definition. And as the Beyonder drifted deeper into this wounded cosmos, he felt countless eyes turning toward him. Some were curious, some were fearful, some hungered. None truly understood what had arrived, but they soon would. The void trembled once more, and the galaxy braced for a revelation it could not possibly survive. The Beyonder drifted farther from the shimmering wound in reality, leaving the fractured warp currents writhing in his wake. The galaxy continued to shudder, struggling to absorb the presence of something that did not fit within its ancient, brutal architecture. His form shifted with effortless grace, never fully fixed, responding more to curiosity than to any physical law. He felt the tremors of fear spreading outward from star system to star system, a silent ripple through the collective human psyche. Yet what fascinated him was not their terror, but the fact that this universe reacted to him at all. Other realities had crumbled before his presence, but this one resisted, as if it possessed a will of its own. He moved through the void like a wandering thought, pausing whenever he encountered fragments of meaning embedded in the stars. He sensed the echoes of extinct civilizations, their ruins frozen in the dark, carrying remnants of unspoken histories. He traced the scars of ancient wars, so numerous and deeply woven into space that they seemed less like battles fought and more like the galaxy's natural state of being. Even the silence around dead suns felt burdened, heavy with unresolved suffering. This fascinated him. Reality here was dense with memory, as if every atom bore witness to the tragedy of endless conflict. As he expanded his awareness, the Imperium recognized him as an anomaly. On Forge worlds, runes of detection flared in alarm. No classification fit. The creature did not register as warp-born, machine-born, or flesh-born. It existed without signature or limitation. its psychic presence both infinite and impossibly clean. To the adepts who glimpsed the readings, it felt like staring at the reflection of their own minds in a mirror, polished too perfectly to be natural. Across one such world, a vast manufacturer moon orbiting a dying red giant, the emergence of the anomaly sent the tech priests into a frenzy. The noosphere buzzed with discordant binharic shrieks as cogitators overloaded. Data streams spiked in patterns that suggested impossible truths. Power readings equivalent to star cores, gravitational distortions matching newborn black holes, and psychic signatures that fluctuated beyond measurable scale. Magos Helva, a figure draped in a mantle of steel tassels and spinal augmetics, stared at the findings with a rare flicker of organic dread. No entity should be able to exist with such contradictory properties. Yet the readings were clear. Something had arrived that defied the boundaries of both matter and the warp. The Beyonder drifted closer to this moon without intention, simply following the gravitational currents that intrigued him. The moon's surface shimmered beneath him, a world of endless factories stretching to the horizon in every direction. Gargantuan forge towers exhaled pillars of smoke thick enough to stain the sky. Sparks cascaded like metallic rain as titanic machines shaped weapons for distant wars. The Beyonder sensed the ceaseless labor of millions, humans reduced to components in a vast mechanism of survival. Their faith flickered like candles in a storm, fragile yet stubbornly persistent. He descended without motion, phasing into the manufactorum's upper atmosphere, unaware of the alarms flooding the facility. Sensing a strange harmony between metal and flesh within the moon's structure, he reached out gently. The machines responded, not in obedience but in fear. Circuitry sparked. Servo skulls spiraled out of control. Gears locked as if the machine spirit within each device recoiled from a presence too immense to comprehend. The Beyonder withdrew, startled again by this universe's violent instinct for self-preservation. His arrival triggered a full-scale emergency. Red lumens flashed across every conduit. Voxcasters blared metallic warnings. Mechanicus overseers chanted litanies to ward against what they insisted was a warp intrusion of unprecedented scale. Yet every psyker on the moon knew the truth. Whatever approached did not follow the patterns of the warp. It felt pure, too pure, as if it was made from an order so absolute that it stood in opposition to everything the Imperium represented. Magos Helva watched through a fractured hololith as a radiant figure slipped effortlessly into the upper atmosphere, its form impossible to capture with clarity. The image twisted, blurred, and corrected itself repeatedly, as if the universe were unsure how to define the visitor. The Magos trembled, a flicker of human instinct struggling against the cold logic of his augmentations. If this being chose to exert force, no defense within the Imperium could contain it. The Beyonder landed at the heart of a vast assembly yard, surrounded by hundreds of half-constructed war engines. The air vibrated with mechanical hymns, the scent of oil heavy enough to coat the tongue. Tech thralls froze mid-step, their minds overwhelmed by the psychic imprint of something that existed beyond comprehension. Only a handful retained enough awareness to scream. He spoke without words, his thoughts brushing gently against the minds around him. He did not command. He did not demand. He simply questioned the nature of their suffering. Why did they labor until their bodies collapsed? Why did they embrace pain as though it were sacred? Why had this universe shaped itself into a reflection of endless struggle? No answer came, only terror. Even as he pondered their silence, the warp surged with renewed agitation. For the first time since his arrival, The Beyonder felt the weight of observation pressing heavily upon him. Something watched him, not a mortal, nor a machine, nor any creature, bound by flesh. It was a gaze formed from the collision of faith, despair, and the echoes of a god chained to a throne of golden agony. The Beyonder felt its attention brush against him like a whisper from across eternity, and he understood that this universe would not meet him with curiosity. It would meet him with judgment. Before he could attempt to understand the source of the gaze, a burst of radiant light erupted above the moon's atmosphere. A vessel descended through the smog, its hull adorned with purity seals and blessed wards. The ship's silhouette cut through the void like a blade of divine wrath. The Inquisition had arrived. The inquisitorial vessel cut through the smoke-choked heavens of the manufacturer moon, its descent fanning out waves of pressure that rattled the forge towers below. The Beyonder lifted his gaze toward the descending silhouette, intrigued not by its weapons or its threat, but by the sharp emotional resonance emanating from within. Fear, discipline, devotion, and suspicion, all tightly bound into a single human will. The presence fascinated him. He felt a mind approaching that did not tremble as easily as the others, a mind accustomed to staring into the abyss and demanding its secrets. Before he could examine it further, the moon shuddered, not from battle or bombardment, but from the subtle backlash of reality struggling against his proximity. The Beyonder felt an unexpected drag, as though unseen forces tugged at the fabric beneath his feet. He turned his attention outward, sensing that the pressure did not originate from the Inquisition at all. It came from somewhere far beyond, far deeper, a psychic tide swelling from the forces of the warp, recoiling instinctively from his presence. The disturbance rippled outward, spreading across the star system like a silent cry. And somewhere in the nearby void, a planet felt that cry. It was a shrine world called Seraphis Sanctum, a place of unyielding devotion where cathedrals rose like mountains and every street echoed with hymns to the God Emperor. Millions prayed beneath carved archways blackened by incense, their lives shaped by ritual and fear. The Beyonder had not touched it intentionally. His presence alone brushed against the world like a passing storm, and the result was immediate. The sky above Seraphis Sanctum split open with a streak of blinding white. Pilgrims gazing upward fell to their knees, convinced they had witnessed a divine visitation. Priests rang cathedral bells until their hands bled, proclaiming a new sign from terror. Yet beneath the awe came unease. The streak did not behave like a meteor, nor like any warp phenomenon recorded by imperial scholars. It moved with purpose, bending light around itself in strange spirals, as if the universe bent aside to avoid touching it. On the manufacturer moon, the Beyonder felt the reaction across the void. His attention flickered toward the shrine world, drawn by the sudden surge of human emotion. He sensed faith burning like a wildfire, raw and consuming. It spread through the world's populace, binding minds together in a single tremor of awe. The sensation intrigued him so deeply that the presence of the descending inquisitorial vessel momentarily faded from his thoughts. Without a gesture, without intention, his attention shifted, and the shift tugged at reality itself. In an instant, he vanished from the forge moon and reappeared in the upper atmosphere of Seraphis Sanctum, suspended in a sky painted by drifting incense clouds rising from hundreds of cathedral spires. Below him, the planet spread out like a tapestry of carved stone and ancient devotion. Chapels the size of fortresses dotted the terrain. Pilgrims filled the streets in endless processions, chanting prayers that rose like smoke into the heavens. The Beyonder descended slowly, curious how this world, and its unwavering belief, would react. He stepped into existence above the Grand Basilica of Saint-Lumerion, the largest cathedral on the planet, its towers rising like spears toward the heavens. The moment his feet touched the air above its domed roof, the stained glass windows shattered inward. Colourful shards rained upon the worshippers below as a wave of psychic pressure washed across the sanctuary. The priests within collapsed to their knees, clutching their chests as visions flooded their minds. They saw a figure standing in a realm beyond light, shaping worlds with a single thought. They saw oceans boiling, stars collapsing, and impossible landscapes forming beneath his hands. Some screamed, others wept. Many believed they had glimpsed the Emperor in a new form. A few whispered that they had seen something far more terrible. The Beyonder felt none of this directly, but he sensed the turbulence it created. This world operated on a level of faith so intense, it nearly formed a psychic force of its own. Their belief shaped their reality. Their worship twisted the warp. Their devotion fueled their survival. It was unlike anything he had encountered in any universe. Here, truth did not matter as much as belief, and belief had the power to shape destiny. He reached out gently, touching the world with a fraction of his awareness. Reality answered, bending in subtle ripples. Flowers bloomed in stone crevices. Weather patterns shifted unpredictably. Some pilgrims found their ailments briefly healed, only for the effect to dissolve moments later as the universe spasmed against his influence. Statues cracked and reformed. Choir voices deepened, echoing with harmonics not human in origin. The Beyonder withdrew quickly, aware now that even his curiosity risked tearing this world apart. But the damage, however unintentional, had already begun. Reports of miracles spread across Seraphis Sanctum faster than the clergy could control. Rumors of a radiant figure above the basilica sparked mass gatherings. Thousands flocked toward the Grand Cathedral, convinced they were witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy. Others, terrified, locked themselves indoors, praying desperately for deliverance from a possible demon masquerading as a saint. Word reached the orbiting Imperial fleet within minutes. Astropaths collapsed as they attempted to interpret the messages, their minds crushed by the psychic echo surrounding the anomaly. The fleet commander, a stern veteran named Commodore Varin, ordered the planet sealed. Vox communication crackled with fear and suspicion. A single command overshadowed all others: contain the event until the Inquisition arrived. As the Beyonder walked across the air above the basilica, the universe beneath him groaned. He sensed again that heavy watchfulness, distant, powerful, wounded, yet immeasurably vast. The same presence that brushed against him on the Forge Moon. It pressed against the boundaries of the warp, observing with a silent intensity that felt older than stars. For a moment, the Beyonder lifted his gaze through the layers of reality, peering in the direction of the Golden Throne across a gulf of darkness too immense for mortals to comprehend. Something awakened, and as the first crack of thunder rolled across Seraphis Sanctum, the Beyonder understood that this world, this faith-filled sanctuary, would not remain untouched for long. Something was coming, something guided by duty, suspicion, and the unwavering belief that all anomalies must be judged. Thunder rolled across the spires of Seraphis Sanctum as the inquisitorial strike cruiser Puritas Veritas tore through the clouds, flames wreathing its armored prow. The vessel descended with grim purpose, its engine screaming against the storm as though defying the very atmosphere that resisted the anomaly below. On the cathedral roofs, pilgrims scattered in terror while others fell prostrate, convinced that divine judgment had arrived. The Beyonder watched the descending behemoth with calm curiosity, sensing inside it a presence far sharper and more disciplined than any he had encountered thus far. It was the same consciousness he had sensed on the manufacturer moon, a mind forged through decades of suspicion, tempered by the horrors of the warp, and strengthened by a faith that did not tremble even before the impossible. Inquisitor Katarina Vore stood at the viewport of the descending cruiser, her expression carved from stone. She studied the swirling disturbance around the basilica with unblinking focus, her gloved hands clasped behind her back. Data feeds streamed across her retinal implants, displaying psychic readings that fluctuated violently. No classification held, no precedent fit. The anomaly read as both present and absent, material and immaterial, infinitely powerful yet oddly restrained. Most troubling of all was its purity. Nothing that emerged from the warp carried such clarity. No Xenos species recorded in the Ordo Xenos archives matched such a presence. And no human psyche, no matter how blessed or cursed, could warp reality with mere curiosity. Her jaw tightened. If it could bend reality, it could break it. A junior acolyte approached with trembling steps, holding a data slate shaking with static. Inquisitor, the Vox channels are collapsing. The pilgrims are reporting visions, spontaneous miracles, and several psychers in the lower districts have expired from cerebral rupture. Katarine did not turn her head. And the anomaly. The acolyte swallowed hard. Still above the basilica, my lady. It appears humanoid, but its form cannot be stabilized by any lens or auger. The machine spirits refuse to render it clearly. That alone chilled her more than any warp reading ever had. Machine spirits faltered only before things that should not exist. Prepare the landing detachment, she ordered. I want a containment perimeter around the Grand Basilica within the hour. Deploy psi shields and sanctified wards. No civilian is permitted within 500 paces of the anomaly. As the acolyte bowed and hurried away, Katerina allowed herself a single breath. She could not yet determine whether this event signaled a divine manifestation or a cataclysmic threat. In her line of work, the difference often meant nothing. Both required control. Both required judgment. Both required vigilance. The Puritas Veritas slammed into position above the basilica, lowering its boarding platforms like descending iron altars. Stormtroopers in carapace armor stormed outward, forming lines across the cathedral rooftop. Their helms flickered with targeting runes, their weapons humming with charged power cells. Behind them followed psychers bound with silvered chains, their eyes veiled, chanting wards to suppress the rising psychic turbulence that threatened to crush their minds. The Beyonder tilted his head slightly as the detachment formed around him. The mortals radiated a strange blend of fear and resolve, their minds taut like bowstrings drawn to the breaking point. He sensed their belief not as an abstract ideal, but as a tangible force, a burning ache in their hearts that gave structure to their fears. It fascinated him more than their weapons, which he understood instinctively as crude tools of destruction. What he could not understand was why they faced him when every instinct within them screamed to flee. One of the psychers collapsed, blood pouring from his nose as his warding chant broke apart. He writhed on the stone floor, overwhelmed by the impossible clarity of the Beyonder's presence. Before the stormtroopers could react, the Beyonder simply shifted a thread of his awareness, easing the pressure around the dying man. The convulsions ceased. Breathing steadied. Life returned to a body moments from death. Gasps erupted across the rooftop. To the Beyonder, it was nothing. A moment of adjustment, a correction. But to those who witnessed it, the implications reverberated like a blade pressed against the throat of their faith. The stormtroopers tightened their formation. Some muttered prayers. Others whispered of sorcery, miracles, or demonic deception. The psychers recoiled, unable to comprehend the act without succumbing to madness. Then the doors of the descending platform parted, and Inquisitor Katarina Vore stepped onto the rooftop. The air seemed to harden around her. Her presence was not physically imposing. Her armor was austere, her stature unremarkable. But her gaze carried the weight of 1,000 judgments delivered without hesitation. She walked across the stone with measured precision, her boots echoing like distant gunfire. Her rosette glinted at her chest, a symbol of authority that commanded obedience across the Imperium. The Beyonder's attention drifted toward her, intrigued by the calm within her mind. She did not fear him as the others did. Her thoughts were sharp and disciplined, honed by decades of training and hardened by survival in a universe that devoured the weak. She stared directly at him, aware that every step brought her deeper into uncertainty. "In the name of the God Emperor," she said, her voice steady, "identify yourself." The Beyonder regarded her for a moment, puzzled. She expected words, yet he had no need for them. Instead, he offered her a flicker of understanding, a gentle touch of thought brushing her consciousness. It was not forceful. It was not invasive. It was simply an attempt to communicate. Katarina staggered, a hand grasping the hilt of her sanctified blade. For an instant, she glimpsed fragments of his nature, a being without boundary, without origin, without malice or desire, a being of pure inquiry. It lasted less than a heartbeat, yet it strained the limits of sanity. "Enough," she whispered, forcing her will to reassemble itself. The Beyonder withdrew immediately, sensing her distress. But the damage was done. Katarina now understood the magnitude of what she faced. This was no demon, no Xenos, no psyker. This was something unprecedented, something outside all categories the Imperium had built to understand its enemies. "Containment protocol is impossible," she murmured to herself. "We are dealing with an entity that reshapes reality by existing." Her words carried across the rooftop, sending ripples of fear through her forces. And far above the world, hidden behind layers of psychic interference, a new presence stirred, one that felt the Beyonder's arrival as a threat to the fragile balance of the Imperium. The Ordo Malleus, the hammer of demons. They were coming. The rooftop trembled under the weight of silence as the inquisitorial forces held their formation, torn between duty and terror. Inquisitor Katarina Vore steadied her breath, forcing her thoughts to align into razor-sharp lines of logic. The entity before her had not attacked. It had not resisted. It had not even attempted to assert dominance. Instead, it merely observed. That fact alone unsettled her more than any act of aggression. Creatures of the warp desired, hungered, sought dominion. But this being radiated none of those impulses. Its presence felt like a question, one the universe itself struggled to answer. The Beyonder drifted a step closer, not walking, but simply bridging the space, as though distance meant nothing to him. The stormtroopers reacted instantly, laser guns rising in trembling hands, safeties released with audible clicks. He felt their fear ripple through the air, a tremor that passed through their armor and into their bones. The sensation puzzled him. They feared destruction, yet he had shown none. They anticipated malice, yet he possessed no such impulse. To the Beyonder, their fear was an abstraction, an expression of a reality shaped by violence, survival, and doubt. He extended a fragment of awareness toward the closest soldier, not to harm, not to command, but to understand. The man's mind opened like a battered door forced ajar. Behind it, the Beyonder glimpsed a lifetime forged by indoctrination and pain. He saw a childhood spent beneath cathedral shadows, a youth trained for war, and an adulthood lived without the luxury of choice. He felt the soldier's belief in the Emperor, a belief so deep it rivaled the Beyonder's own nature in intensity. Yet beneath it lay fear, not of death, but of failing in his duty. The Beyonder withdrew, shaken for reasons he could not articulate. The human soul, fragile as it was, burned with a vitality he had never encountered. Other universes held mortals who lived, fought, and dreamed. But here, faith itself was a weapon sharpened by despair. Inquisitor Katarina sensed the shift. The entity had learned something. That alone meant the situation was evolving beyond her control. With a subtle gesture, she signaled her forces to hold position. No attack, no retreat. The wrong action could ignite catastrophe across the entire world. "You examine us," she said, her voice steady despite the pulse pounding through her veins. "Why?" The Beyonder did not speak. Instead, the ground around him softened, the air vibrating with invisible resonance. Images flickered faintly, echoes of insight rather than full illusions. Worlds he had traversed, dimensions he had shaped, realities that bent to his will without resistance. Then the images shifted abruptly, forming silhouettes of humans laboring, bleeding, praying. A universe drowning in unending war, suffering woven into the fabric of existence. Katarina gasped as the meaning struck her. He was trying to understand them. "Your curiosity," she whispered, "is dangerous." The Beyonder sensed the tremor in her voice, the tension of responsibility. She feared not only for the world, but for the entire Imperium. He felt the weight she carried, an empire built on the edge of collapse, held together by belief and brutal necessity. The magnitude of it fascinated him. This universe was not governed by logic or harmony, but by perpetual conflict. Yet its inhabitants endured. They persisted because they must. The storm deepened overhead, as though the sky itself sensed the fragile balance. Lightning split the clouds, revealing the towering basilica below, where thousands of pilgrims had gathered despite the lockdown. Their prayers rose in waves, desperate and fervent. Some cried praises, believing the radiant figure to be a saint. Others whispered of demons and apocalypse. Drawn by their emotions, the Beyonder turned his gaze downward. He felt them all, their hope, their terror, their faith burning so brightly it nearly became a physical force. He reached toward them instinctively, not with power, but with curiosity. Katarina felt it instantly. "Do not touch them." But the gesture had already happened. A ripple of energy pulsed through the basilica, gentle yet profound. For an instant, every heart beat in perfect unison. Every mind glimpsed a flicker of connection to something vast, incomprehensible, and serene. The effect lasted less than a breath, and then reality recoiled. The cathedral walls groaned, incense burners shattered. Pilgrims collapsed beneath the psychic backlash, clutching their heads as visions of impossible truths burned behind their eyes. Some saw angels, some saw devils. Few could separate revelation from agony. The Beyonder stepped back, startled. He had intended to observe, not harm. This universe reacted to him with violent sensitivity, as though its very foundations resisted his presence. He felt its laws tightening around him, like muscles spasming in pain. Katarina's blade was in her hand before the echoes faded. "You must cease," she warned, her voice low but unwavering. "This world cannot withstand your curiosity. Every action you take disturbs the very fabric of reality." Her words intrigued him more than any reaction thus far. A world that resisted him. A galaxy that fought to protect itself. He had known universes that yielded to his will without complaint, but never one that pushed back out of instinct. It was as if this cosmos possessed a primitive form of consciousness, scarred, wounded, and fiercely defensive. He felt the distant gaze again, the vast presence on Terra, watching, questioning, waiting. A tremor ran through the warp itself. Katarina felt it too. "More forces are coming," she said, half to herself. "The Ordo Malleus will not hesitate. They will treat you as a threat to all existence." The Beyonder considered this. Threat. Existence. Concepts foreign to him, yet now unavoidable. This universe was forcing him to confront boundaries he had never acknowledged. His curiosity awakened further. He wanted to understand suffering, faith, conflict, the paradox of a reality that endured despite crushing hopelessness. But he also sensed the danger now, not to himself, but to everything around him. One wrong thought could unmake continents. His presence alone reshaped fate. And as the storm clouds churned with unnatural hues, he realized something deeper still. The galaxy was changing in response to him. Forces were mobilizing. Prophecies were bending. Hidden powers were stirring. The Beyonder's arrival had become a catalyst, and the galaxy would soon decide whether that catalyst brought salvation or annihilation. The storm above Seraphis Sanctum thickened into a churning mantle of iron-grey clouds, trembling with an unnatural pressure that vibrated through the cathedral spires. The Beyonder felt the tension building across the world like a tightening cord. Inquisitor Katarina sensed it as well, her eyes lifting toward the sky with a grim awareness that the next arrival would not be cautious like she was. It would not observe. It would not question. It would act. Moments later, the clouds split apart in a spear of golden fire. A drop pod thundered down through the heavens, its descent carving a trail of molten air across the sky. The thunderclap that followed shook the basilica to its foundations. Pilgrims screamed and scattered in every direction, their terror and awe pulsing through the Beyonder like the pounding of distant drums. He felt the world brace itself as the metal pod slammed into the courtyard before the Grand Cathedral, crushing stone and sending up a cloud of pulverized dust. The Astartes had arrived. Even before the pod's doors exploded outward, the Beyonder sensed their presence. Minds honed into instruments of war, bodies shaped by impossible science, souls bound to an iron creed. They were unlike the stormtroopers on the rooftop. Their fear was not of him, but of failing the vows etched into the marrow of their existence. Their resolve burned with the force of suns. They moved not as individuals, but as extensions of a single relentless oath. Black Templars. The crusading sons of Sigismund emerged in a formation that radiated controlled fury. Their armor, black as voidstone, glistened beneath flickering lightning. White tabards whipped in the wind. Their helmets, sculpted like the visages of vengeful statues, turned toward the Beyonder with lethal intent. The red crosses upon their pauldrons glowed in the stormlight, symbols of unyielding devotion and merciless purpose. At their head strode Castellan Ravus Dragor, a towering figure whose presence felt like a bolt of iron driven into the world. His sword, a relic infused with a fragment of sanctified light, hummed with caged violence. The Castellan did not hesitate. He did not speak. He did not question. He simply advanced. Inquisitor Katarina stepped forward, raising a hand. "Castellan Dragor, stand down. The situation is unstable. A direct confrontation could end a threat that should never have touched sacred ground, Dragor answered, his voice rumbling like a distant avalanche. Inquisitor, your authority is acknowledged. Your caution is not. He moved past her with the certainty of a man who believed hesitation itself was heresy. The Beyonder watched him approach with calm interest. This warrior radiated a purity of purpose unlike anything he had encountered. Not the purity of innocence, but the purity of absolute conviction. Dragor's soul burned like a controlled inferno, disciplined, hardened, unbreakable. The Beyonder reached toward him gently, attempting to understand the nature of such unwavering resolve. The reaction was immediate. Dragor's entire being recoiled violently, a psychic backlash erupting around him like a flare of incandescent wrath. His mind slammed shut with the force of a fortress gate, reinforced by layers of indoctrination, spiritual conditioning, and the sheer brutality of Astarte's willpower. The Beyonder felt the impact as a sharp sting, an unexpected resistance that startled him more than any weapon had. Dragor raised his blade. "You touch my mind again, abomination," he growled, "and I shall carve your essence from this realm." The Beyonder blinked, puzzled not by the threat, but by the fury behind it. Dragor's faith was a force, palpable and violent, shaped into a weapon sharper than his sword. The Beyonder reached toward the blade itself, not to disarm, but to understand the energy coiled within it. The metal quivered, straining against the impossible pressure of his curiosity. Katarina hissed under her breath, "Dragor, if he reacts..." But the Castellan was already charging. The ground cracked beneath his weight as he crossed the distance in a single devastating leap. His sword descended in a sweeping arc capable of cleaving a tank in half. The air howled around the strike as the full might of a transhuman warrior crashed toward the Beyonder with unstoppable force. The blade never reached him. It froze inches from the Beyonder's chest, suspended in mid-air as though time itself had paused to witness the moment. Dragor strained, every muscle fiber in his enhanced body surging with power. His armor groaned, his gauntlets shook, but the blade remained immobile, trapped by an invisible force as gentle as a breath, yet absolute as eternity. Gasps echoed across the rooftop. Some stormtroopers stumbled backward. Others stared as though witnessing a miracle. The psychers collapsed to their knees, unable to comprehend the clash of wills. The Beyonder lowered his gaze toward the blade, studying it with soft curiosity. He pressed lightly with a fingertip. Reality rippled. The sword dissolved into a cloud of harmless golden particles before reassembling itself whole and untouched in Dragor's hand. No damage. No violation, simply transformed and restored in a gesture as natural to the Beyonder as breathing. Dragor staggered, gripping the weapon with disbelief and rising fury. "You mock the Emperor's chosen?" The Beyonder tilted his head, confused. He had not mocked. He had merely explored. Before Dragor could strike again, the basilica ground trembled beneath them. Pilgrims screamed. An unseen pressure swept across the city like a psychic tidal wave. The Beyonder felt the warp, writhe, reacting violently to the clash of cosmic presence and human willpower. The Black Templars sensed it too, tightening their formation around their Castellan. Katarina stepped between them, her voice sharp as a blade. "Enough. Every confrontation destabilizes the warp. If you continue, you will tear this world apart." Dragor did not lower his weapon, but he halted his advance. The Beyonder felt something stirring, not within himself, but across the fabric of reality. The universe strained under the weight of his presence and the Astartes' defiance. As he attempted to comprehend the tension, a new sensation rippled across the warp. Cold, hungry, ancient. Something had noticed the confrontation. Something not human, not holy, not bound by flesh. In the churning storms above, the first whispers of chaos curled like serpents through the air. The warp was reaching back. The storm above Seraphis Sanctum deepened into a monstrous whirl of blackened clouds, veins of warp light twisting through the sky like living arteries. The Beyonder felt the shift immediately. A presence rising from the depths of the Imperium, cold and immense, drawn not by his intention, but by the violent clash of will and belief that now stained the air. The Black Templars sensed it too. Their formation tightened into a defensive circle, bolters raised, flames of their purity seals snapping as the psychic wind tore across the rooftop. Inquisitor Katarina felt the ripple of warp force crawl across her skin like the touch of a diseased hand. The basilica below erupted in screams as pilgrims collapsed under invisible pressure. The very air thinned, the sky groaned, and through the psychic turbulence she felt whispers, warped, layered, mocking. Voices that should never have been heard by mortal minds. Dragor's visor snapped upward. "The veil weakens," he growled. "He has invited corruption by merely existing here." Katarina's reply was strained. "No, this did not come from him. The warp reacts because it fears him, or desires him. I cannot tell which." The Beyonder studied the sky as though observing a painting shift colors. He sensed the Imperium bending toward him like a beast circling its prey. Not out of hunger, not simply, but out of recognition. In this universe, power was currency, and the warp drank power like blood. His arrival was not merely noted, it was coveted. From the heart of the storm, shapes formed, silhouettes writhing within the clouds, their outlines flickering like broken reflections. The Beyonder felt their presence before their forms manifested. 4 immense wills pressing against reality from the other side, ancient and malicious, woven from the echoes of mortal emotion, twisted beyond reason. Khorne's rage burned like molten iron, hammering against the boundaries of the world. Tzeentch's schemes coiled in spirals of impossible futures, testing the limits of possibility around him. Nurgle's decay seeped from invisible fissures, eager to embrace the new anomaly in its festering love. And Slaanesh's hunger brushed against him with an intoxicating pull, tasting the edges of the limitless. They had felt him. They wanted him. The clouds tore open. A scream of tortured air split the sky as a tear in reality spread across the heavens like a wound. From its depths stepped a figure armored in baroque plates, adorned with living runes, its form wreathed in violet and gold flames. Its face was a shifting mask, its movements serpentine and graceful. Around it, reality warped subtly, as though it dragged part of the Imperium with it, a champion of Slaanesh. Another tier widened beside it, exhaling fire and the scent of blood. A second figure emerged, towering, encased in brass armor etched with marks of slaughter. Its skin glowed red-hot through the gaps, and its horns curled forward like a bull preparing to gore the world itself. A champion of Khorne. The rooftop descended into chaos. Bolters roared. Sanctified flames spewed across the charging demons. The Black Templars advanced with battle cries that shook the stone beneath their boots. Dragor charged at the brass-clad juggernaut, his sword igniting in a blaze of golden light as he struck with ferocity born from holy fury. But the Beyonder felt none of the frenzy as chaos erupted around him. Instead, he felt something profoundly unexpected from the champions. They were in awe, not of humanity, not of the Emperor, not even of their own dark gods. They were in awe of him. Their minds radiated fascination and greed, hunger and reverence. They did not see a foe or prey. They saw potential, the raw, infinite possibility of a being that could bend reality with a thought, power that could reshape the warp itself. The Slaaneshi champions stepped lightly across the air, each footfall birthing ripples of shimmering light. Its voice slithered across the rooftop, both seductive and venomous. Radiant stranger, your presence intoxicates the warp. You stir desires even the gods have forgotten. The Beyonder tilted his head, unable to decipher the creature's intentions. It reached a hand toward him, claws elongated and adorned with rings made of living bone. Come, let us show you what ecstasy the Imperium can offer. Dragor intercepted the creature with a roar, his blade cleaving through the air in a brilliant arc. The champion evaded with fluid grace, laughter echoing behind it as it danced backward like a living shadow. The Khorne champion attacked without words, swinging a chain axe that crackled with the souls of the slain. The blow could have split the basilica in half. Instead, it passed harmlessly through the Beyonder's form, meeting nothing. The champion snarled, enraged by the impossibility, and swung again. The Beyonder observed calmly. His form was not intangible. He simply shifted, altering his position in existence by an infinitesimal degree. The universe adjusted around him, denying the blade a target. But the presence of these beings intrigued him. They were shaped by emotion, defined by belief. Their essence was the manifestation of thoughts given flesh. They were made by the minds of mortals, yet they possessed power that surpassed entire civilizations. He reached out toward the Khorne champion, not to harm, but to understand. The demon froze. Its rage expanded outward, then inverted violently, collapsing into itself. The Beyonder felt its fury twist into confusion, then fear, then something deeper, irrelevance. He glimpsed the core of the creature's nature, built upon an ocean of mortal bloodshed and endless war, a being entirely defined by conflict. He withdrew, leaving the demon staggering, disoriented. Its entire being had been laid bare in an instant, stripped of meaning by a single curious gaze. The Slaaneshi champion hissed sharply, sensing the shift. It extended both hands, summoning tendrils of warp light that wriggled like living serpents, each aimed to pierce the Beyonder's essence. The tendrils reached him and evaporated. The champion recoiled, stunned. For the first time, both demons sensed something they had never felt. The warp could not touch him. Fear flickered in their eyes. The storm above screamed, as though the chaos gods themselves were reacting. The ripples of their agitation tore through the Imperium, warping the ground beneath the basilica. Stone cracked, reality bent. Katarina's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of revelation. They fear him. Dragor, locked in combat with the wavering Khorne champion, shouted over the storm. Fear is not enough. They will try to claim him. The Beyonder felt their intent shift. Curiosity had become desire. Desire had become hunger. The champions lunged, not to strike, but to grasp. He stepped back, and the warp recoiled violently. The clouds above split open into a vortex of swirling color as a new force entered the battlefield, drawn by the psychic shockwave exploding outward. Something far greater than champions. The chaos gods themselves had taken notice, and they were reaching for him. The vortex above Seraphis Sanctum churned like an open wound in the heavens, its spiraling depths pulsing with the raw hunger of the warp. The chaos gods pressed against the thin membrane of reality, their vast and ancient wills straining to reach the anomaly that defied every law they commanded. Though they could not manifest fully, their intent flooded the atmosphere in waves that twisted the air and shattered the fragile minds of nearby pilgrims. Even the champions they had sent faltered, staggering beneath the crushing weight of their patron's agitation. The Beyonder felt all of it. Rage that burned like dying suns, schemes woven from the threads of potential futures, a sickly affection dripping with rot, and a yearning so deep it stretched into madness. These presences dwarfed the demons on the rooftop, their magnitude stretching across eternity, yet they were not whole. Their attention was fractured, bleeding through a distorted gateway. The warp could not fully grasp him, just as reality could not contain him. He sensed their desire, not for destruction, but acquisition. They wanted to pull him into their realm, to fold his essence into the tides of the Imperium, to claim him as a new force within their eternal conflict. To them, he was possibility incarnate, a force that could reshape the very nature of the warp. He stepped backward, not out of fear, but to observe how reality responded. The world shuddered, the sky rippled, the silhouettes in the clouds convulsed in frustration. Their reach was limited. Their power, immense though it was, could not define him. Katarina staggered as the psychic tempest raged around her, clutching her temple as blood trickled from her nose. Even her careful mental barriers strained under the pressure. Dragor planted his sword into the stone to stabilize himself, his armor groaning. The Black Templars formed a shielded perimeter, chanting litanies meant to ward off demonic influence. Their voices wavered but did not break. Their oath was unyielding. The Beyonder turned his attention to them again. Small beings, so fragile yet resisting the magnitude of entities that dwarfed galaxies. Their conviction left a faint imprint upon him, something he could not yet define. He felt the suffering around him, the agony of the psychers collapsing under the warp's distortion, the terror of pilgrims cowering behind shattered walls, the trembling faith of warriors facing forces beyond understanding. He sensed the weight of this universe, shaped by endless war, sculpted by desperation. It gnawed at him, a sensation unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. He wished it would stop. The thought came unbidden. An idea formed not from calculation but emotion. The suffering troubled him. The pain felt unnecessary, chaotic, wasteful. In his universe, suffering was an anomaly. Here, it was the very foundation. The contrast disturbed him, and in that disturbance grew a desire he had never experienced, to relieve it. He turned his gaze toward the gathered pilgrims below, thousands of them crushed by fear and despair. Their voices rose not in harmony, but in discordant pleas for salvation or mercy. The Beyonder extended a hand. The universe buckled. A wave of shimmering energy fanned outward, soft as mist yet powerful enough to reach every soul in the plaza. The terrified breathing of the pilgrims slowed. Their shaking ceased. The psychic torment pressing on their minds unraveled. The fear bleeding through the crowd dissolved into a calm so profound it felt divine. For a heartbeat, Seraphis Sanctum knew peace, and reality screamed. The calm collapsed violently, rebounding like a snapped cable. The warp roared as a surge of contradictory energy tore through it, the Beyonder's intention clashing with the fundamental laws of a universe built upon suffering. Worlds where peace was unnatural resisted it like a body rejecting foreign blood. The psychic shockwave ricocheted back toward the plaza with catastrophic force. The ground split open. Cathedral pillars cracked. Incense braziers detonated. Pilgrims who had been touched by the Beyonder's peace convulsed as the warp forced their minds back into alignment with its own violent equilibrium. Some cried out in ecstasy, others in terror, others in both. A few stared skyward with wide, blissful eyes, and then collapsed lifelessly, their hearts unable to withstand the abrupt metaphysical recoil. The Beyonder recoiled, stunned. His attempt to soothe had broken the world's balance. This universe was not built to sustain hope. It twisted all good intentions into new forms of suffering. Katerina forced herself upright, her voice cracking as she shouted, "Stop! You cannot alter a world built on pain without disrupting everything tied to it. The warp feeds on emotion. Every change you make sends shockwaves through its fabric." The Beyonder's form flickered with confusion. He looked at his own hand, as if unsure how the simple gesture had resulted in such devastation. The law that governed this universe resisted him, punishing even gentle acts. The Slaaneshi champion laughed through broken gasps, sensing opportunity. "You see now, Radiant One. This galaxy is shaped by torment. You touch it, and you wound it further." The Khorne champion growled with raw contempt. "Weakness births only more slaughter. This is the truth of existence." Their words, though steeped in malice, reflected the deeper law of the galaxy. Hope was not a cure here. It was a destabilizing force. The Beyonder felt something within him shift, an awakening. The contradiction troubled him. The resistance intrigued him. The suffering compelled him. But now he understood that merely removing pain would not bring peace. It would tear reality apart. He lowered his hand slowly. The warp quieted, though only slightly. The storm still churned above, now tinged with colors that should not exist. The Chaos God still pressed against the veil, now hungrier than before. They had witnessed the ripple of hope breaking the world's balance. They had seen his mistake, and they sensed the potential in every flaw. Katerina stepped closer, her voice firm despite the tremor in her stance. "You must not attempt to heal this world. You cannot. Our reality is bound to suffering. Remove it, and you unravel everything." The Beyonder studied her carefully. He sensed truth in her words, truth shaped not by resignation, but by understanding. He looked down at the plaza, where survivors now clung to one another with trembling hands, their faith shaken but not broken. He felt something new, responsibility. But before he could explore this sensation, the storm above shifted violently, and a psychic roar split the sky. A new force approached, singular, ancient, and vast. Drawn by the chaos he had unleashed, the Emperor had stirred, and his gaze was turning toward the Beyonder. The storm above Seraphis Sanctum held its breath. For a moment too fragile to measure, the warp recoiled into a tense, unnatural stillness. The demonic whispering ceased. The champions froze mid-strike. Even the Chaos Gods, vast as storms across eternity, drew back in wary silence. The Beyonder felt the change ripple through existence, a tremor that did not come from the Imperium, but from something rooted far deeper, older than faith, older than the Imperium itself. Something colossal was watching, not with eyes, nor with psychic reach, nor with the tendrils of warp influence. This gaze was different. Ancient authority pressed against the edges of reality, subtle but absolute, like the weight of a star resting on the soul of the universe. The Beyonder shifted his awareness toward the source, drawn by its gravity. His vision expanded outward, traversing space without distance or direction, pulled through the void toward a single burning point of golden brilliance. Terror. He sensed it before he saw it, the roar of 1 trillion minds screaming prayers into the warp. the Astronomicon blazing like a sun forged from anguish and devotion, the endless psychic labor that kept the Imperium alive. And at its center, buried beneath mountains of crumbling stone, machinery, and ritual, lay the golden throne. The artifact vibrated with layered suffering, the agony of 10,000 psychers sacrificed to fuel a beacon of light, the sorrow of a prison forged to hold a godlike will in chains. Then, through the veil of machinery and pain, the Beyonder felt him, the Emperor, not awakening, not fully aware, but stirring, a faint tremor, like the shifting of a colossus in a distant dream. The psychic field surrounding Terra pulsed once, sending a silent wave through the galaxy. It struck the Beyonder with the weight of a world's determination. It was not a greeting. It was not a threat. It was acknowledgement. Reality itself seemed to bow beneath that subtle gesture. The Black Templars felt it immediately. Every warrior on the rooftop went rigid, their armor trembling as a single, overwhelming presence washed through them. Dragor fell to one knee, his sword planted in the stone not in weakness, but reverence. His voice cracked as he whispered, "The Emperor's light. It flares." Katarina clutched her chest, overwhelmed by the echo of his will. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but the unbearable pressure of divine weight pressing against mortal limits. She dropped to one knee beside the warriors, breath shuddering. The Beyonder watched in silence. This was new. He had traversed universes ruled by gods, beings who commanded planets, beings who forged stars, beings of pure creation. But this presence, this Emperor, was different. He was not merely powerful. He was entrenched, rooted into the very architecture of reality, his influence woven into the galaxy's survival. He was dying, decaying, trapped, yet his will still rippled outward with immeasurable force. The Beyonder sensed the paradox, a god too great to die, yet too broken to rise. And yet, even in his chained stillness, he was reaching outward, not to attack, to measure, to understand. The Beyonder felt tendrils of psychic perception brushing against him, not invasive but searching. He did not resist. He allowed the Emperor's dormant consciousness to observe him. Their awarenesses touched for a single instant, and reality warped under the strain of the contact. The Beyonder glimpsed something impossible, a flicker of humanity buried beneath an ocean of power, a fragment of a man who had once walked among mortals, laughed among brothers, wept at betrayal, a man who had tried to shape a better future and had been broken on the wheel of the galaxy's cruelty. And the Emperor, in turn, glimpsed the Beyonder's nature, a being not born of the warp, not shaped by mortal emotion, not bound by the laws of time, fate, or consequence, a presence that could rewrite existence by thinking, a force outside the primordial struggle between chaos and order. The contact shattered like glass. The warp screamed as it recoiled. The demons on the rooftop convulsed, their forms flickering as their masters withdrew in a mixture of fury and fear. The rift above the plaza twisted violently, collapsing into a spasm of lightning and void fire before sealing itself into turbulent clouds. The champions staggered back, unnerved, the influence of their god suddenly muted. Katarina gasped, rising to her feet with trembling limbs. The Emperor reacted. He sensed it. He sensed you. The Beyonder lowered his gaze, the world beneath him blurring as he absorbed the meaning of what had transpired. This universe had judged him, not through mortals, not through demons, but through a broken god bound to a dying throne. The weight of that judgment pressed upon him like a question he could not ignore. Dragor rose slowly, tightening his grip on his sword. If the Emperor himself stirred at your presence, then you are a threat beyond measure. The Beyonder listened, but his attention remained inward. For the first time since arriving in this world, he felt uncertainty. Not fear, he did not understand fear, but a sense of imbalance. His presence here bent reality. His thoughts reshaped fate. His attempt at kindness had shattered a fragile equilibrium. This universe resisted him, yet now it had addressed him directly. He lifted his gaze toward the sky as the storm regained its violent momentum. The warp still boiled beyond the clouds, but it no longer lunged toward him. It circled, it studied. The Chaos Gods had retreated slightly, wary of the force that had flickered awake on Terra. The Beyonder sensed the galaxy shifting around him, destiny twisting around his presence like chains of light and shadow. Responsibility grew heavier, and with it came a realization, quiet, unsettling, profound. The Emperor was not finished. His brief stirring had changed the pattern of fate. Something ancient had awakened, if only for a heartbeat, and that heartbeat would echo across every star. The echo of the Emperor's stirring still trembled across Seraphis Sanctum when the Beyonder turned his gaze once more toward the sky. The storm had not calmed. It had changed. The clouds no longer churned in wild, chaotic hunger. They swirled with direction, as though waiting for the next move in a game that had suddenly grown far more intricate. The demons, shaken by the Emperor's faint but seismic reaction, retreated into the fraying seams of the Imperium, their forms unraveling like smoke dragged backward into a furnace. Yet their departure did not ease the tension. It magnified it. The warp was watching. Katarina sensed the shift first. Her breath faltered as she steadied herself against the parapet of the basilica rooftop, feeling the sudden silence inside her mind where the warp screams had moments earlier clawed for dominance. "It hesitates," she whispered. "The Imperium hesitates." Drago shook the dust from his armor and stepped to her side. "Chaos does not hesitate," he growled. "It merely changes its approach." He was right. The warp was not retreating. It was gathering its strength. The Beyonder sensed a gravitational pull, not physical, but conceptual, like a whisper tugging at the edges of his consciousness. It called to him without words, without emotion, without intention. The call was simply there, existing outside thought, and yet intertwined with every fragment of it. The Imperium wanted him, not out of the same desire exhibited by the demons, but because something in his nature resonated with the vast, writhing ocean of raw thought that formed the warp. He drifted a step forward. Space folded in quiet ripples around him. The air trembled as the call deepened, its pressure intensifying like a tide rising against a fragile shore. Katarine's eyes widened. "Do not answer it. If the warp draws you in, we cannot retrieve you. Nothing can." But the Beyonder was no longer listening, not in defiance, but in curiosity. He had glimpsed the Emperor's essence, a sliver of it, an imprisoned god, bound to a throne of agony, holding the galaxy together through force of will. If this universe anchored its hope in such torment, what then was the warp? What was this tumultuous realm that fed upon emotion yet shaped destiny? What truth lay beneath its madness? The thought, simple, innocent in intent, was enough. Reality imploded around him. One moment he stood upon the basilica rooftop, the world trembling beneath him. The next, the universe folded inward, colors twisting into shapes that had no form, sounds bending into textures, and time dissolving like ash blown through light. The warp engulfed him, not violently but eagerly, wrapping around his essence like an ocean, welcoming a falling star. To the mortals watching, he simply vanished into a pillar of unlight. Katarina staggered forward, reaching out as though she could somehow pull him back. Dregor grabbed her arm and pulled her aside, before the psychic backlash could consume them both. In the space where the Beyonder had stood, only silence remained. But he was not gone. He was elsewhere. He found himself suspended in a realm with no up or down, where existence itself seemed to breathe. The warp roiled around him in immense tides, waves of emotion given substance. Every colour shimmered with impossible depth. Every shadow whispered with dissonant secrets. Insanity was not a consequence here. It was a law. The Beyonder floated through it untouched, his presence creating ripples that bent the tides away from him instinctively. The Imperium recoiled, then surged closer, confused, fascinated, unable to decide whether he was prey or predator, god or anomaly. Countless voices surrounded him, psychers screaming at distant ends of the galaxy, mortals dreaming, tyrants plotting, warriors dying. Each thought was a drop in an endless ocean, merging, separating, reshaping itself with every passing moment. For the first time, the Beyonder understood how deeply this realm permeated reality. The warp was not merely adjacent to the universe. It enveloped it, shaped it, devoured it, reflected it. He extended a hand, touching the surface of a swirling current. The entire warp convulsed. Emotions burst outward in a shockwave. Fear, rage, ecstasy, despair, so violently intertwined that they blurred into pure, undifferentiated chaos. The Beyonder stepped back, startled. He had not tried to change anything. He had merely touched. But the warp was too malleable, too unstable, too alive. It reacted to the faintest stimulus like a living organism experiencing pain. A shape coalesced before him, a figure formed from shifting flame and shadow. Its face flickered between a dozen expressions, each belonging to no one and everyone. A demon prince. It bowed, not in reverence, but in instinctive submission to a presence that threatened its very identity. "You do not belong," it hissed, its voice layered with countless others. "Yet you are. Kin." Kin. The Beyonder considered the word, tasting its meaning. A being born of thought and potential might have resembled him in form. But this creature was shaped by suffering, bound to endless conflict, warped by the desires of gods who themselves were slaves to emotion. He shook his head slowly. Not kin. The demon's form shuddered, its uncertainty bleeding into the surrounding tides. "The warp will shape you," it whispered, "or you will unmake it." The Beyonder stepped closer. The demon recoiled in horror. He reached deeper into the warp, not to change it, but to understand it. His awareness expanded, stretching across its depths, touching every corner of its shapeless expanse. He felt everything. Every broken prayer, every dying scream, every forbidden hope, every whispered fear. The warp was humanity's reflection, magnified, twisted, unrestrained. A mirror that devoured its own image. A storm made of thought, fed by endless suffering. This universe was trapped in a cycle it could not escape. He withdrew suddenly, overwhelmed not by the magnitude, but by the clarity of the truth. The warp was not evil, it was not good. It was simply a wound that could not heal, because the galaxy bled into it endlessly. A thought formed within him, dangerous, impossible, yet undeniably his. Could he fix it? The warp trembled violently, as though the question itself was a blade pressed against its heart. And far away, on the mortal world he had left behind, the sky shuddered. The basilica's stained glass windows exploded inward. Every psyker within 100 leagues collapsed in agony. The Black Templars staggered to their knees. Katarine gasped as she felt the Beyonder's essence shift. Far away, yet impossibly close, like a second sun rising behind the veil of reality. He was returning, and he was not unchanged. The moment the Beyonder's essence tore free from the warp and began its return, every psychic beacon across Seraphis Sanctum erupted in agony. Sanctioned psychers collapsed in the streets, their eyes turning milky white as the aftershock of his transcendence struck them like a hammer of pure resonance. Choirs aboard orbiting ships screamed in unison before falling silent, their voices snuffed out as though a great hand had closed around their throats. Even the Black Templars braced themselves, armor shuddering as a tremor of raw, unfiltered power washed across the world. Katarina Vore pressed a palm to the cracked stone beside her, her breath trembling as the air thickened into a strange, shimmering density. "He is coming back," she whispered, barely able to speak. "But he is heavier. He carries the warp inside him now." Dragor tightened his grip on his sword. No mortal realm can endure such a presence. The sky darkened, swallowing the last remnants of natural light. A dome of violet and golden radiance spread outward from a single point high above the basilica. Space bent inward, then outward, twisting in impossible geometry. The Beyonder stepped through the distortion with no physical motion, appearing as though he had always been there, as though the universe itself had forgotten he had ever left. But he was changed. The shimmering aura surrounding him flickered with fragmented reflections of the Imperium, shadows of thoughts, echoes of emotions not his own, remnants of countless psychic impressions that clung to him like threads of color. Yet he remained untouched by corruption. The warp had not stained him. Instead, it recoiled around him, bending to avoid contact like water fleeing from a flame. He looked at the world differently now, not with curiosity alone, but with comprehension. He had tasted the truth of the warp and seen the endless suffering that fed it. He now understood that the galaxy's torment was not merely historical, it was structural, and something within him ached with the knowledge. The mere presence of his changed essence sent tremors rolling across Seraphis Sanctum. Pilgrims screamed as visions overwhelmed them. Some collapsed, whispering prayers of salvation. Others ran in terror. One unfortunate psyker ignited into pale fire, consumed by the psychic backlash. Dragor stepped in front of Katarina, raising his blade as a shield despite knowing it was useless. "Stand firm. Do not yield to the distortion." But the distortion was not aggression. It was simply the weight of the Beyonder's understanding pressing against reality. Katarina forced her eyes open and stared into the radiant figure. "What did you see?" she breathed. "What did the warp show you?" The Beyonder did not answer. Or perhaps he did, but not in words mortals could perceive. The air around him vibrated with a resonance that tasted of revelation and sorrow, as though he now carried the knowledge of a dying universe within him. Far above the world, hidden within the endless labyrinth of ships, fortresses, and dreadnoughts that orbited Seraphis Sanctum, the Imperium reacted. The High Lords of Terror did not debate. They did not argue. They did not speculate. The psychic ripple that passed through the Astronomicon after the Emperor's stirring had shaken them to the core. The arrival of an unclassifiable being capable of destabilizing the warp with a thought triggered a single, ancient, catastrophic protocol. Exterminatus. Not on Seraphis Sanctum alone. On any world touched by the anomaly. Orders traveled through encrypted channels, bypassing all bureaucracy. Battlefleet Sanctus began immediate mobilization. Cyclonic torpedoes were loaded. Orbital bombardment patterns were configured. Adeptus Astartes strike cruisers prepared for final sanction. Even the Mechanicus fleet stirred with mechanical urgency, chanting Binharic hymns of eradication as they readied planet-killing ordnance. In the command bridge of the flagship Dominus Rex, Admiral Helbrecht, the fleet commander, a man whose face had been carved by decades of merciless campaigns, stood over a hololithic projection of Seraphis Sanctum, its surface flickering with seismic distortion. Inquisitor Vor has failed to contain the anomaly, he said coldly. The Emperor himself reacted. That alone proves the scale of the threat. His second-in-command nodded gravely. The order is clear. No world touched by this being may be allowed to persist. Prepare the exterminatus signal, Helbrecht commanded. Begin countdown. On the surface, far below, Inquisitor Katarina felt the fleet's intent ripple through her neural implants. She staggered as the message burned across her internal vox link. Her blood ran cold. No, she whispered. They've authorized it. They're going to destroy the world. Dragor stiffened. Then we hold our ground. Until the end. For what purpose? She shot back. You felt what I felt. The Emperor reacted, not in wrath, but in observation, in judgment. If he did not order destruction himself, why do we assume he wills it? Dragor's jaw clenched. The Emperor's will is interpreted by his servants. The anomaly endangers the Imperium. That is all the justification required. Katarina looked toward the Beyonder, who floated inches above the shattered rooftop, his expression conflicted, as though he struggled with a truth too immense to articulate. The air warped around him with each flicker of emotion. He's trying to understand us, she said softly. Perhaps even help us. Help? Dragor's voice cracked into a bitter laugh. His help nearly tore a holy world apart. And our violence nearly provoked the warp into consuming us all, she whispered. They fell silent as the Beyonder descended slowly. The ground trembled beneath his feet, then steadied. He looked from Katarina to Dragor to the fleeing crowds below, sensing their fear, their pain, their fragility. He felt the crushing weight of responsibility again, not for causing suffering, but for having the power to end it, or amplify it. He sensed the fleet above preparing to unleash destruction. He tasted their resolve, forged from duty and terror. The Imperium did not act from cruelty. It acted from survival. It killed worlds because it believed no other choice existed. And for the first time, the Beyonder felt something unfamiliar. Helplessness, not for himself, but for them. He raised his head toward the sky. The exterminatus countdown had begun, and the Imperium was ready to burn a world to ashes because of him. The sky of Seraphis Sanctum churned like a cauldron of molten dusk as the exterminatus countdown echoed through the orbiting fleet. Invisible signals pulsed from vessel to vessel, cold and absolute, carrying with them the inevitability of planetary death. The world below felt that verdict long before the first weapon was armed. Pilgrims dropped to their knees in the streets, their prayers rising in panicked waves. Clerics rang cathedral bells in frantic desperation. Soldiers whispered litanies they had memorized since childhood. Even the battle-hardened Black Templars braced against an ancient instinct, as though the air itself tasted of finality. The Beyonder felt all of it, the fear, the resignation, the fury, the desperation. Their emotions washed against him like rain falling on an untouched sea. Yet this time, the impact stirred something he could not ignore. Their dread pulled at him, not because he shared their mortality, but because he finally understood its roots. This universe had taught them to fear everything. It had shaped their lives through brutality and doctrine, until surrender was a natural response to forces beyond their control. He turned his gaze upward, searching the void for the source of the planetary death sentence. The intentions of the fleet were unambiguous. He could feel the minds behind the weapons, officers hardened by centuries of service, chaplains reciting rituals of annihilation, tech adepts whispering the names of the machine spirits they were about to unleash. None of them hated Seraphis Sanctum. None desired death for its people. But they obeyed. They believed annihilation was the only path to safety. The Imperium judged him a threat, and now it would destroy its own world to eliminate the anomaly. Katarina Vore stepped forward, her voice hoarse as she fought against the choking psychic pressure still lingering in the air. "Listen to me," she said, barely above a whisper. "The fleet above will not hesitate. Once the order is completed, nothing we do on the surface can change the fate of this world." Dragor stood beside her, unmoving, his armor still trembling with the echo of the Emperor's distant stirring. His eyes locked on the Beyonder, his voice a thunderous growl. "If you desire to save these people, abomination, then surrender yourself. Give the Imperium what it demands. Let them contain you, or destroy you, and Seraphis Sanctum will be spared." Katarina shot him a glare. "You know containment is impossible. It does not matter." Dragor's grip tightened on his sword. The Emperor's will must be upheld through decisive action. If the being refuses to submit, then the world must die. The Beyonder studied him, sensing the layers of conviction and violence braided into the Astarte's soul. Dragor did not speak from cruelty. He spoke from an unwavering belief that discipline preserved humanity. Sacrifice was simply the cost of survival. But the Beyonder also sensed something beneath that faith, a trembling uncertainty, buried deep, that the Emperor himself might not have willed destruction, that a flicker of hesitation had existed in the immeasurable psychic reaction. The Beyonder stepped down from the air, letting his feet touch the cracked stone of the basilica rooftop. The earth trembled slightly beneath him, then steadied. His voice remained unspoken, yet its meaning unfolded in the minds of those around him. Why must they die? Katarine's breath caught. She felt the question reverberate inside her skull like a distant bell. "Because," she answered softly, "the Imperium cannot risk an unknown capable of reshaping reality. If you remain, you may destabilize not only one world, but the entire galaxy. You saw how the warp reacted to you. Your presence tears at its fabric. You frighten them." The Beyonder considered this. He had not meant to frighten. He had not meant to rupture the veil or ignite the fear of gods. He had simply reacted to the suffering he witnessed. Yet every attempt he made to alleviate pain only deepened the scars of the world. He looked at the plaza far below. Thousands of terrified faces looked up at him as if he were some divine arbiter. Their fear of destruction, their begging for mercy, twisted into a single overwhelming plea. "Save us." The Beyonder felt their desperation like a physical force pulling at his essence. But intertwined within that plea was another current. The Imperium's dread of change. A perfect being, a limitless anomaly, did not fit within the order they believed necessary for survival. To the Imperium, the unknown was death. To the Beyonder, the known was suffering. He found himself suspended between two impossible truths. He lifted his hand toward the sky, feeling the exterminator's warheads priming in orbit. Their machine spirits stirred with malignant certainty. massive cyclonic torpedoes, each capable of unmaking a continent, awaited only the final command. Space Marines aboard fire control decks chanted litanies of righteous destruction. Servitors interfaced with launch augurs, their minds stripped of hesitation. The Imperium's judgment was inevitable, unless he intervened. Katerina stepped closer, placing herself directly before him. Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. If you strike the fleet, if you destroy those ships, you will be seen as a cataclysm. Every arm of the Imperium will hunt you. Every inquisitorial conclave will unite in the cause of your eradication. Billions will die in that pursuit. The Beyonder lowered his hand slightly. Dragor stepped between them, his sword raised not in fury but warning. And if you do not act, this world dies now. This is the trial set before you, not by chaos, not by the Emperor, but by reality. A trial. The words throbbed like a heartbeat within the Beyonder's mind. The Imperium had forced him into a dilemma with no peaceful solution. To save the world, he must confront the very empire that had judged him. To allow the world to die was to accept suffering as the only law of existence. He turned his gaze inward, searching the memory of the warp he had touched. He saw the cycle of death and hope repeating endlessly, each event feeding the next, each tragedy birthing another. The warp offered no solution. The Imperium offered only destruction. Chaos offered nothing but hunger. But he could choose. He looked once more at the sky. The Exterminatus countdown reached its final stage. Katerina whispered, "What will you do?" The Beyonder slowly rose from the ground, his essence shimmering with new clarity. He would not strike. He would not surrender. He would change the rules. The sky above Seraphis Sanctum pulsed with lethal intention as the Exterminatus countdown neared its final breath. The fleet's torpedoes thrummed with burgeoning annihilation, their cyclonic cores swelling like embryonic stars desperate to be born. The world's fate balanced on a single moment. One heartbeat, one thought, one choice. And as the Beyonder slowly ascended through the trembling air, the tension that gripped the planet clenched tighter, as though the very crust sensed the weight of what he was about to become. Katerina watched him rise, shielding her eyes from the radiance now spilling from his form in shimmering waves. He was neither blinding nor violent, but impossibly clear. Light that held no warmth, no shadow, no defined edge. Dragor stepped forward, sword raised only halfway, uncertain whether to strike or kneel. For the first time since his descent, even his iron resolve faltered. He could not name what he saw above him, only that the being had crossed a threshold mortals were never meant to witness. The Beyonder gazed upward through layers of atmosphere, beyond the clouds, past the flickering void, where the warp still trembled from his return. His awareness expanded, stretching effortlessly through the boundary between matter and warp, touching every mind upon the world, not intrusively, not violently, but gently, like a hand brushing tall grass as it walks through an endless field. He began to count, not numbers, not tally marks, not metrics. He counted lives. He felt the priest kneeling in the shattered nave of the basilica below, his hands trembling over a cracked relic as he begged the emperor to show him mercy. He felt the terrified mother hiding her 2 children beneath a fallen archway, whispering stories of angels to drown out their sobs. He felt the scarred veteran gripping his lasgun like a lifeline, knowing he could not fight what hung in the sky, but refusing to bow to despair. He felt the psyker whose mind flickered like a damaged lantern, terrified not of death, but of losing control and harming those around him. Every soul cried in a different voice. Every voice echoed in him like a constellation being drawn into focus. Their memories flooded him. Births in candlelit chapels, nights spent praying for food, battles fought for a faith they only half understood. Suffering was everywhere, etched into their identities, woven into their dreams. Yet beneath it pulsed something resilient, something fragile but unbreakable. Hope. Hope that the Emperor would watch them. Hope that sacrifice meant something. Hope that tomorrow would not be worse than today. He had seen worlds shaped by logic, order, harmony, universes where pain was an anomaly. But none had possessed this strange, defiant spark that burned so hot in the hearts of mortals who lived their entire lives under the heel of despair. Their suffering had not extinguished them, it had forged them. The Beyonder drifted higher, his form softening into a silhouette woven of shifting light. The world fell silent. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. He continued the census, reaching beyond Seraphis Sanctum, across the void, his awareness sweeping outward like a tide seeking a shore. He felt the souls aboard the Exterminatus fleet, crew members reciting the catechism of final sanction, junior officers swallowing their fear as they obeyed orders they did not question, chaplains invoking the God Emperor with voices thick with grim resolve. He felt the battle group commander, Admiral Helbrecht, standing rigid on the command dais, awaiting confirmation that the fleet's weapons were primed. Helbrecht did not relish the destruction of a shrine world, but he believed in necessity, and necessity in the Imperium often wore the mask of extinction. The Beyonder saw all of it, not with sight, but with comprehension. He turned his gaze inward again, searching for the thread that had been tugged loose within him. Responsibility, sympathy, awareness. These were human concepts, fragile, limited. Yet they resonated with him now, rippling through his essence in a pattern he could not deny. He understood the universe too clearly now to ignore them. A spark ignited within him, expanding gradually, like a star blooming in an abyss of forgotten truths. If he altered fate by merely existing, then he must choose what shape that alteration took. He could not remain neutral, not anymore. Something in the warp trembled violently, as though sensing the direction of his thoughts. The Chaos Gods recoiled in unease. They had observed him counting, and in that simple act they recognized danger. Danger not to mortals, but to them. An entity that measured souls without judgment, without hunger, without fear was a creature they could not bend, corrupt, or tempt. Worse still, he had begun to care. Katarina felt the air vibrate with a soft hum, a resonance so pure it made her knees buckle. She looked up, tears streaking her face as she sensed a profound shift in the being's presence. Not escalation, not wrath, something infinitely quieter. He sees them, she whispered, all of them. He sees who we are. Draeger's jaw tightened. That knowledge may doom us all, or save them. Neither could name which. As the final seconds of the Exterminatus countdown ticked toward the abyss, the Beyonder completed his survey. The full tapestry of humanity unfurled within his consciousness. Bright threads, broken threads, threads soaked in blood or braided with impossible resilience. He understood now that suffering was not a flaw in this universe. It was the crucible in which its people forged themselves, and he could not allow them to be erased because of him. A decision took shape within him, not as a command or reaction, but as a truth drawn from the totality of the souls he had touched. If he remained passive, the cycle would repeat. If he acted blindly, he would only birth new suffering. If he vanished, the galaxy would collapse back into its endless war unchanged. But if he intervened with purpose, with understanding. Perhaps he could nudge an immovable universe toward a new equilibrium. He lifted his hand toward the heavens, fingers trembling not with doubt, but with the weight of countless lives resting upon a single cosmic intention. The first cyclonic torpedo began to fire. The Beyonder's choice had arrived. The first torpedo left its cradle with a low, resonant hum, cutting through the Shachi, orbiting void with the inevitability of death itself. The Beyonder's awareness expanded outward, touching the instrument of annihilation before it had fully left its rail, and for a single heartbeat, he felt the collective anticipation of the fleet. Hundreds of thousands of hands, eyes, and minds poised to end a world, held in a tension more fragile than any cathedral glass. Time seemed to pause, stretched across the moment like taut wire, waiting for the next act to decide whether it would sing or snap. He lifted a hand toward the trajectory, and the torpedo halted mid-flight. The engines hummed, but produced no motion. He touched it lightly with a ripple of thought, not destroying, not bending, simply communicating intent. The machine understood, not as a human mind might, but as a piece of reality recognizing the pattern of the impossible. The exterminators paused, suspended between judgment and mercy, caught in a decision that no mortal force could enforce. Katerina fell to her knees on the cracked stone of the basilica rooftop, her voice trembling as she whispered, "He has stopped it. He stopped it." Dragor, sword raised, watched as the impossible unfolded. Even his seasoned mind, tempered by centuries of war and doctrine, could not pass the scale of the act. A being had intervened in the machinery of the Imperium, halting instruments designed to wipe a world clean, not by force, but by presence alone. The Beyonder's eyes, if eyes they could be called, turned outward to the gathered masses below. His gaze encompassed every individual, the terrified pilgrims, the collapsed psychers, the trembling priests, and even the Black Templars holding their formation with awe and disbelief. He felt every fear, every hope, every flicker of devotion that had survived the psychic chaos, and he understood something the universe itself seemed unable to grasp: potential. Potential not for domination, not for victory, but for choice. The Imperium had chosen destruction because it could conceive no other path. Chaos had desired his corruption because it sought power through his will. And the warp had tested him, as it tested all beings, seeking to shape him into its reflection. Yet here, in this moment, he recognized that a single intention could alter the trajectory of countless lives without erasing the intricate weave of fate. He turned his awareness to the Black Templars. Dragor's resolve had not faltered in fear, but in realization. The warrior understood that the impossible was unfolding before him. The Beyonder did not command, coerce, or punish. He assessed, he acknowledged, and he chose. Katerine's voice trembled again. If he acts, if he truly acts, the Imperium will see this as defiance. Worlds beyond this one will rise in judgment. Orders from terror will come, and there will be no mercy. She looked upward, her eyes wide with awe, and yet he understands them. The Beyonder's form expanded slightly, light, cascading outward, brushing every corner of the plaza and the trembling city with its ineffable presence. He reached not with power, but with intent, a thought that resonated as gently as a caress, and yet as firmly as a decree. Across the world, the psychic pressure eased. The panic in the air softened. Hearts began to beat with steadier rhythm, minds struggling to reconcile the impossible calm that had descended upon them. Those who had seen visions of death, now glimpsed a fraction of understanding, an awareness that their suffering had been observed and their lives accounted for in a manner both absolute and impartial. Above them, the fleet quivered. Admiral Helbrecht's command bridge pulsed with the incomprehensible tension of halted inevitability. The torpedo array shimmered, poised in mid-air, awaiting impossible instruction. Every hand aboard the flagship felt the weight of a decision beyond comprehension. Time bent, not because the Beyonder commanded it, but because the universe itself had shifted in recognition of an intervention that could not be resisted. The Beyonder's gaze drifted upward once more, toward the distant shimmer of terror. In the Golden Throne, the Emperor's awareness had already begun to stir, reacting to the anomaly he had sent rippling across the galaxy, not in wrath, not in command, but in silent observation, a question unspoken. What will you do with the power placed before you? The Beyonder felt the immensity of that gaze, the gravity of a will ancient and bound to the survival of countless worlds, and he weighed it against the lives pressing in on him, the suffering he had glimpsed, and the potential for hope that had revealed itself in every corner of Seraphis Sanctum. He could unmake the world. He could remove the Imperium's influence with a thought. He could vanish, leaving the galaxy to collapse into endless war, its suffering untouched and eternal. He could grant miracles, elevate the mortals into temporary guardianship over their fate, or reshape the warp currents to protect the planet entirely. All paths were open, all consequences were profound, and all required choice. He breathed, if a being such as he could breathe, and allowed himself to feel the weight of the galaxy pressing into every fiber of his consciousness. He understood that perfect power was meaningless without understanding, that omnipotence without responsibility was tyranny, and that intervention must be measured not in force, but in wisdom. His hand lowered slowly, deliberately, as if drawing a line in reality itself. The Exterminatus torpedoes shifted imperceptibly, their trajectory aligning with no command but the subtle guidance of a mind outside the constraints of the universe. The fleet held. The countdown ceased. The world beneath him quivered, but did not break. He had decided not to annihilate, not to surrender, not to ignore. He would preserve, as far as it could be preserved, the fragile pattern of life and faith woven through this world. The Imperium's judgment would remain, tempered by his presence. The warp's hunger would watch, frustrated but contained. Chaos would gape, unfulfilled and impotent, and the mortal souls, trembling and terrified, would awaken to a universe that had observed them and chosen restraint. For a single heartbeat, the galaxy inhaled. Then, a quiet ripple spread outward, a vibration across reality that whispered not of power, not of wrath, not of chaos, but of intent, the intent of one perfect being who had weighed infinite consequences and chosen to intervene in defiance of inevitability. A decision had been made. The consequences would echo across eternity, and the universe would never forget. The aftermath of the Beyonder's choice lingered like a suspended breath. Seraphis Sanctum lay in fragile equilibrium. Pilgrims huddled in trembling groups, whispering prayers to gods both seen and unseen, their terror slowly giving way to wonder. The basilica's spires had survived the psychic maelstrom, though cracks ran like veins of silver across the stone. Bolters remained loaded but untouched, soldiers tense yet unbroken, their discipline tempered by awe. Even the warp above, still roiling and hungry, held its edges, restrained by a presence that no demon or god could bend. The Beyonder hovered above the plaza, a figure of impossible clarity and quiet authority. His form shimmered with the residual energy of the warp, the fragments of souls he had touched still lingering as whispers along the edges of his awareness. He sensed every heartbeat, every tremor of fear and hope, and understood that his decision had altered the flow of countless destinies. The exterminator's fleet, suspended by his will, awaited no further command, poised yet paralyzed by the quiet impossibility of the moment. Even the Black Templars, stalwart and unyielding, remained still, unable to grasp the magnitude of the restraint imposed by a being beyond judgment. Katarina Vore fell to her knees, clutching the cracked stone beneath her. Her mind reeled from the psychic resonance, her thoughts a tangle of fear, awe, and incomprehension. He has done what no one could, she whispered. The Imperium would have burned this world to ash, and yet it survives. Draegor remained upright, though his armor bore the tremors of strained reality. His voice, deep and steady, carried the weight of centuries of battle and doctrine. Not by force, not by command, but by understanding. That is the measure of the impossible. The Beyonder's awareness extended outward once more, touching the stars beyond Seraphis Sanctum, sweeping over worlds untouched and unseen. He sensed every corner of the Imperium, every flicker of life, every shadow of death. He understood their fears, their doctrines, their relentless cycles of judgment. He understood chaos and the endless hunger that awaited the weak, the unprepared, the unsuspecting. And he realized that, too, Remain was to become the center of endless conflict, a focal point that would draw every force in the galaxy toward him. He was a paradox, beyond the rules, beyond comprehension, and yet intimately entwined with the fates of all living things. To linger would be to impose his own measure on a universe not built to sustain such freedom. His presence, benign as it might seem, threatened the balance of every reality he touched. He must act again. He lifted a hand, tracing the invisible currents of the warp, feeling its tension tighten like threads of steel. The Chaos Gods, their champions still lingering at the edge of the storm, recoiled instinctively, aware that their hunger could not reach him, and that his understanding rendered their dominion impotent. The Beyonder did not strike, did not destroy, did not bend reality to anger. He merely moved with the quiet inevitability of a force beyond law. And as he stepped backward, reality seemed to inhale, stretching to accommodate the departure of something impossible. Katarina sensed it first. He is leaving, she whispered, barely audible over the thunder that had returned to the sky. He will vanish from this world. Draegor's jaw tightened, his grip on the sword remaining taut, even as the impossibility unfolded. He leaves not in retreat, but in judgment, he said. His lesson is complete, and yet the consequences remain. The Beyonder drifted upward, higher than the basilica spires, higher than the clouds, and higher than the trembling fingers of the warp itself. His form began to blur, edges dissolving into the air, fragments of energy folding into themselves like origami in impossible patterns. The light that had bathed Seraphis Sanctum shifted into gentle radiance before fading entirely, leaving behind only the echoes of presence and understanding. He did not vanish violently. He did not explode into sparks or fire. He withdrew, leaving only resonance, leaving only memory. The exterminator's fleet, released from his subtle command, remained inert, their torpedoes poised yet untouched. Across the stars, warp currents began to settle, demons retreating from the edge of perception, their hunger frustrated, their plans deferred. The Chaos Gods turned their attention elsewhere, but their frustration remained, palpable even to the mortals below. On the ground, The people of Seraphis Sanctum slowly rose, looking to the sky with wonder and fear, feeling the absence of a presence they had only glimpsed yet, would never forget. Some whispered prayers, unsure if they addressed the Emperor, a god, or the impossible being who had touched their world. Others fell silent, overwhelmed by the weight of survival delivered without explanation. Katerina wiped tears from her eyes, her mind attempting to reconcile what had occurred. "He understood us," she murmured, "not as mortals, not as warriors, not as the Emperor's servants, but as life itself." She looked to Dragor, who nodded without words, understanding that the moment they had witnessed would echo far beyond their own comprehension. The Beyonder's consciousness expanded one last time, touching every thread of the world he had left intact, absorbing and recording, witnessing and weighing. He felt the potential for growth, for faith, for defiance, for suffering, and for hope. He catalogued it not with judgment, but with understanding. Every soul he had encountered remained, marked by survival and resilience, preserved within the gentle precision of his omniscient awareness. Then, with a subtle shift, he withdrew entirely from the physical universe, not in violence, not in haste, but as one might leave a room after observing the pattern of existence, leaving everything as it was, yet subtly altered. The sky above Seraphis Sanctum cleared. The storm dissolved into fragments of lingering light. The warp itself sighed, momentarily still, as if relieved and yet unsettled. Katerina and Dragor stood in silence, the gravity of what had transpired settling like dust in their minds. The world below remained intact, yet the memory of what had occurred would remain alive in every trembling heart and every silent whisper for decades, perhaps centuries. They had witnessed not just a presence beyond comprehension, but a choice beyond morality, power, and law. And somewhere beyond the stars, beyond the Imperium, beyond the reach of mortals or gods, the Beyonder existed still. He carried with him the weight of a universe, the knowledge of suffering, and the quiet, impossible intent to observe, to understand, and to act where reality itself could not intervene. Seraphis Sanctum survived. The impossible had chosen restraint, and the galaxy would never be the same.